Dr.Sharat Linn. Dr. Linn is a renowned scholar and activist with extensive experience in labor studies, social movements, and political economy. Dr. Linn will be addressing a complex and timely topic, intersectionality and disjunctions of Hindu upper-caste supremacy, Zionism, and white supremacy. This presentation promises to delve into the intricate relationships and the divergences between these ideologies, offering a nuanced understanding of how they interact in today's global context. Dr. Linn's work has consistently challenged us to think critically about power structures and social hierarchies. His interdisciplinary approach brings together insights from sociology, political science, and cultural studies to shed light on some of the most pressing issues of our time. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Sharat Linn.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rohit, and thanks, for that generous introduction, and for AKSC for inviting me again, and all of you for being here. So the previous presentation, is an excellent segue into my talk, right? Because I was actually there at that Hindutva Zionist march at Stanford, and of course before that, that we had experienced many situations where there would be displays of right-wing Indian Americans holding the American flag and saying, Indian Americans for Trump, and that sort of thing. So we're familiar with this, even though it's still, its most extreme forms are still a fringe in the Indian American diaspora. But what I wanted to do, and this I asked Karthik, who invited me, what should I speak on, and he suggested something along the lines of this talk. So I said, okay, that sounds like a great idea because it's something that I hadn't really spent a lot of time looking into. So this is still a works in progress. I'm just developing some of the data to try to understand what's happening and what are the opportunities. As an activist, I have to look at also the opportunities. So let's go to the first slide. Yes. So and that's the next one. So. The first thing is to understand, and the first definition is mostly for Americans here, because when we talk about religious groups in the United States, people in the U.S., not so much in India, not so much in Asia, but in the United States, people think of, who are the people who practice a certain religion. And so you have these religious categories, and then you have atheists, people who don't practice any religion. Atheism to me and it may be to some, but certainly to me it's not an identity group. I don't identify as an atheist. But the other religious categories like being Hindu, being Christian, being Catholic, I mean these in Asia are identity groups. If I go back to India, and based upon the communities that I circulate in, I'm looked upon primarily as a Hindu. Not so here, because I just don't practice the religion. So that's just a clarification there. The second one is about Zionism. So Zionism is the ideology and the movement for the creation of a Jewish homeland in what eventually became Israel. So I wanted, just for the benefit of this audience, because I don't know how many of you are really familiar with Zionism as a concept and where it came from. So this first of all, this conflict between Israelis and Palestinians first of all, it didn't start on October 7th, right? It has a long history. There's a long historical context. At the same time, it's not age old. It's not thousands of years old, right? It's important to understand that yes, there were pogroms in Europe, but the anti-Semitism was for some centuries was experienced in Europe and in white-dominated countries or white countries, and was almost non-existent in the Middle East, in India, in the global South. So it's a very important distinction to make. And the real beginning of Zionism, of course, is with Theodor Herzl and the World Zionist Movement, the first convention held in Basel, Switzerland in 1897. And then this idea of creating a Jewish homeland because of the feeling that the only place that Jews would be safe is if they had their own place to control everything. They control the state, they control the land, and then it eventually developed the concept of exclusivity. That it is something that is for Jews and not for anyone else. Okay, and then of course this all accelerated with the Holocaust and what was starting to brew in Germany and the areas that Germany controlled. And of course, when there was a great deal of pressure for Jews to escape Nazism, the World Zionist Movement was providing assistance for European Jews to go to Israel. But when those same Jews who were fleeing Europe wanted to go to the United States, or where they wanted to go elsewhere, the World Zionist Movement refused to help them. So this is an important piece of explaining what are the motivations of the World Zionist Movement. And most of the rest I won't go into because you know about the creation of Israel. But the one thing that is not maybe generally known that you need to understand because this term terrorism is used to demonize Palestinians. It's used to demonize the opponents of whether it is Zionist supremacy or Hindu supremacy or white supremacy. This term terrorism is used. But if we look at the origins of Israel, there were some Arab uprisings, but they really began in the 1920s, and in part it was partly in response to Jewish land acquisition. A lot of this was institutional acquisition by the Jewish Agency and other institutions of global Zionism. But more importantly, it was because of the Zionist militias that started up. And these were the first terrorists in Palestine. That's what we have to remember. So the first of these was the Haganah. So the Haganah was founded in 1920 to go and terrorize Palestinian villagers, chase them out, and as a response, or rather as a provocation that led to the Arab uprisings. The first major Arab or Palestinian uprising was in 1929. In 1930, you had the formation. Well, the formation of the Irgun. And the Irgun was formed because they believed that the Haganah was not militant enough, it was not violent enough. And Irgun stands for, Irgun means the Irgun Zvei Leumi, which is the Jewish military organization. And then in 1940 there was the formation of the Lehi because they thought that the Irgun was not militant enough. And 1941 the Palmach which was the elite force of the Haganah. And so all of these were were militias. They're not legal groups. They were there to terrorize Palestinians. When Israel became a state in 1948, all of these groups, these militias, were integrated into the so-called IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, and they became regularized in the Israeli military. So this is sort of the background to Zionism that you really have to understand. But it's not the topic of tonight. So next slide. So the question that I'm seeking to answer today is there a risk of Hindu upper-caste supremacy finding a common cause with Zionism? And as was just presented to you, the case at Stanford is a perfect example of this happening. So next slide is what I want to show in this video is, before we started, is that that one of the characteristics of Hindutva is casteism. And I want to show a parallel that Zionism also has its sort of casteism, right? So the casteism is the superiority of the ruling Ashkenazi. So that we're talking about Jews who hail from the European countries, from the white countries, who are themselves, ordinarily considered, when you look at them, considered to be white. Differentiated from the Sephardim, or the Eastern Jews, those in Spain, and more specifically the Mizrahi. The Mizrahi are the Arab Jews, the Jews who came from the Arab countries. And then even more so, we don't even have time to cover it here, but the Falashas. So we have both there's two kinds of Ethiopian Jews, black Jews. One are the Ethiopian Jews who were historically Jewish, and then the Falashas, who are mostly converts from Christianity or other religions into Judaism in Ethiopia. And when they migrated to Israel, they faced tremendous discrimination. Okay, but let's just play this video. It's very short.
Arab Jewish identity.
White supremacy is deeply embedded into Zionism, even inside the Jewish world.
Israeli writer Alan Mizrahi is the son of a Palestinian Jewish father and Moroccan Jewish mother. He spoke to us about the hostility Jews from the Arab world faced after the creation of Israel, and the pressure they felt to abandon their culture and even the way they spoke.
The humiliation Arab Jews experienced in Zionism is something they never experienced in the Arab countries, in Muslim countries. They never experienced white supremacy in Morocco or Iraq or Yemen. They only experience it here.
45% of Jews in Israel originate from the mostly Arabic-speaking countries in North Africa and the Middle East. Today they're called Mizrahi. Many left those countries after a rise in hostility largely sparked by Zionism and Israel's creation in 1948. But in Israel they faced hostility too. Zionism's early leaders condemned them for being too Arab, calling them uneducated masses and savage.
They treated brown Jews and Jews from Muslim origins from Arab countries as inferior.
When they arrived in Israel, Mizrahi Jews were placed in transit camps, then slums and so-called development towns, largely to provide cheap labor to Ashkenazi settlements.
Arab Jews needed to unlearn Arabic and to unlearn their Arabic accent. I asked my mother, how come you didn't rebel against this? And my mother told me, you don't understand. When I was a young woman, the best compliment anyone could give me was, but you don't look Moroccan. Everything that was good was European and American and Western.
The domination of Ashkenazi Jews in Israeli society also meant Mizrahi Jews inherited the trauma of the Holocaust.
The experience of European Jews, of endless persecutions, pogroms, and all this experience they went through, which Arab Jews didn't go through. They were told that the people that they had lived with and lived next to for all those centuries were now the worst enemies for many IDF soldiers who are ethnic Arabs, who are Arab Jews. When they are mocking those women who look and sound exactly like their grandmothers look. This is saying, look look at how much I'm not an Arab anymore. Look at what I'm willing to do to show to you that I'm not an Arab.
Alon says Israel's desire to carve out a European or Western identity ultimately works to erase Judaism's diversity and history.
Jews were actual Semites, not white Americans telling you they are Semites. We had Jews in Morocco and Yemen, in Iraq, living in their places, in their towns, and praying in their synagogue for hundreds of years. This whole world of meaning is gone. And it's not gone because Germans came and destroyed it. It's gone because Zionism came. If you talk about the experience of Mizrahi Jews in Zionism, then Zionism explodes. Because if Jews are not allowed to be themselves in their promised land, then Zionism is a lie. If you have to hate Arabs the minute you set foot in Israel, then Zionism is a lie, because many Jews were also Arabs and spoke Arabic.
Okay, thanks. So Zionism has its own, sort of analogy to caste, and there is not only a supremacy of Jews over non-Jews in Palestine, but there is also a supremacy of Ashkenazi Jews over non-Ashkenazi Jews. So this, what I'm talking about today is focusing on Indian Americans, and this is how Indian Americans identify. They self-identify. So 54%, so a slight majority, identify as Hindu. But because I imagine that because of the framing of the question, this is not about exclusively about identity group, but it is also, to some extent, a question about whether the people think that they practice the religion, and that's why you have something, this box in the lower right, which is practicing no religion or being atheist or agnostic. So it's not really, this question is not really framed as an identity question, right? But it gives you some idea of how people identify, and also the notion that has been mentioned widely in the literature, that Indian Americans are not, as a whole, particularly religious. There's a large segment of Indian Americans who are not religious and don't practice anything. Next slide, please. So I did a little bit of brainstorming, and I thought, okay, so what are some of the factors that may be in common between upper-caste Indian American Hindus and Zionists and also white supremacists? What do they have in common? So one, of course, is that all of these differentiations are based on social constructs. Whether it is race, caste, these are social constructs. They're all based on a sense of privilege. So the Ashkenazi Jews in Palestine have a sense of superiority, and you cannot imagine how. I mean, it's only come out very recently, where these people have, through their own self-testimony, have said, we are, in no uncertain terms, just right to your face, saying that we are superior, and these Palestinians are to them nothing but animals. Okay, so that sense of superiority. and of course the fact that the large majority of Hindu Americans are coming from a position of privilege in India, mostly from the upper castes, and of course white supremacy. I don't need to even explain it. White supremacy in the United States. It's not necessarily that they have an economic advantage today, but that historically they had that. They were the property owners. They had a monopoly on the control of the institutions of the country, of governance and so forth. And also with privilege comes what some writers call invisibility, that you can go about your normal daily life and never even think about your identity. But if you're brown, you're constantly called out, for your brownness, or like people will come to me and say, "Oh, where are you from?" Okay, even though I was born here, right? So that I'm not invisible to them. And then, well, power, I've already talked about it, but power also conveys empowerment. Just like Trump, the way that Trump acts, the way that he speaks with impunity is because of white empowerment. Obama could never do that, right? Because he didn't have that kind of white empowerment. He spoke very carefully. Wealth, well, to some extent, and of course this is historical chauvinism. Connecting the superiority of the dominant group to nationalism, to the country, all right, or a false sense of what the country stands for. Patriarchy is also connected here. I won't get into it today. And then, of course, dominance over other identity groups. So all of these things, all of these factors are common factors in all of these three kinds of supremacy. Next slide, please. So this looks at income by identity group. This is a Pew Research Center. What I want to draw your attention to is the top two lines, the Hindu and the Jewish Americans, and so their income levels of these two groups are way above the U.S. average. They really are outliers. So these two groups have that in common. There's a certain economic privilege today. Next slide, please. And it's largely because of education, but also because of selectivity of the people who immigrated here. Next slide, please. Well, I should also go back there and show that Muslims, in contrast, so the other group that's of interest is Muslims, of which Indians only form a very small part, but they're way down on the list. So Muslims are economically somewhat disadvantaged within the U.S. context. Okay, next, please. So education. So educational level, you see that let's see, it's down at the bottom. Okay, so the highest education level are the Jewish, Hindu, and then the Unitarians. And so Unitarian, so it turns out, well, that Unitarians are there because they start out being educated. It's educated people who have a greater tendency to, because of their thinking, to break away from institutionalized and rigid, religious structures. And otherwise, it's the Jewish and the Hindu Americans who are the most educated. So there's another common characteristic there. Next, please. Party affiliation. So you see that if you look at Hindus, take the Hindu line, and you see that the Hindus are, according to this study, which is some years ago, that they are 4 times more likely to affiliate with the Democratic Party than the Republican Party. Okay, so Indian Americans are overwhelmingly liberal voters. Jewish voters are similar, but to a lesser extent. Now, put this in context. Jews form a very, very important part of the American left, and even more so historically. So I was really shocked to learn that the U.S. Communist Party, before the Second World War, 90% of the Communist Party in the USA before the Second World War was made up of Jews. So Jews were at the forefront of liberal and left movements in this country. And now that's becoming less so, particularly as the Jewish population ages. And but still, you see that they are Democratic over Republican by a wide margin. Next, please. But this is in contrast to the whites, right? Particularly the evangelicals who make up a large part of the Republican base. This is just to say that, you know, a measure of religiosity, where the Hindus are the light blue line, so the Hindus are let's see, what is, they are, how do we interpret this? Less religious. Yeah, that's what I was a little bit thrown off there. But yeah, they are less religious in terms of their you know, practice of the religion, practice of rituals. Next, please. And there's also an age differentiation. And we see this in all groups. We see that certainly among American Jews, also in American Hindu Americans, that it is the religiosity decreases with age, and so what we see with the Gen Z is really very hopeful and looking towards the future. Next, please. Now, so these are some of the similarities. What are the disjunctions? What are some of the disjunctions between the three groups? Well, for one thing, only the whites and the Zionists share an affinity towards settler colonialism. I mean, they were the architects of settler colonial projects, whether it was the U.S., the formation of the U.S., or the formation of Israel. And Indian Americans have no affiliation to that. In fact, they were the victims of colonialism. And so that is a differentiator, that when we talk about organizing Indian Americans, we have to, remind them that part of our campaign is that we experienced colonialism, and so we must not, as Indian Americans, have anything to do with settler colonial projects, whether it's the U.S. or Israel. There is a so the Zionists or the Jews suffered from what I call an intergenerational trauma from the Holocaust, and so that trauma has been transmitted down over the generations to Ashkenazi Jews today, which even transfers to the Mizrahi, as the video showed, and this is the trauma that is being expressed today. At least this is a partial explanation for it. With the genocide that is happening today in Gaza. And that is something that we can point out to Indian Americans, that we don't have any kind of intergenerational trauma like that. There's no reason to be violent, to support genocide. Historical dominance. Well, am I running out of time? Okay. Okay. So anyway, you see these things, but the other thing that is notable here is the age difference. Is that the Indian American population is a young population, because the waves of immigration have been employment motivated. People coming over here on H-1B visas to work. They're young families, and so the median age of Indian Americans is quite low, and that's a reason for optimism, because the young people seem to understand things. They understand Zionism. They understand, social issues in this country and around the world, and also remind Indian Americans that we are a brown people and we have faced discrimination, and that is something that we have to fight against white supremacy and Zionism, which both of them are racist, and relate that to the struggle against caste. Okay, next. Okay, so this is just the age distribution. I've already discussed it. Next. I realize that this is a little bit too complicated for, but it just shows the variation of attitudes depending upon age. That the young voters are more liberal, and they also look more favorably upon minority groups than the older people do. Next, please. And this is just the political difference between the Democrats and Republicans. Even though Jews are historically liberal, but they are looked upon more favorably by Republicans than Democrats. So this is views of different religious groups by members of the two parties. Next, please. And reminding Indian Americans that they have experience with discrimination in this country. And next, please. But there is also an acknowledgement by Indian Americans that they are not the most discriminated against. So this is showing that other minority groups, that it's a recognition by Indian Americans, a survey of Indian Americans, that other ethnic groups in the United States have suffered more discrimination than they have. And that's because Indian Americans have a certain amount of at least economic and educational privilege. Next, please. Let's skip this. So here are the points. Zionism, to remind Indian Americans that Zionism is a settler colonial project that you have nothing to do with. Zionism is a discriminatory, exclusive ideology, and it is, supports apartheid. It is apartheid. Acknowledgement of intermediate privilege. That means that Indian Americans are privileged, but they are also underprivileged in other ways, and they have to be part of the movement for social justice. And of course, just the basic principles that what's at stake in Palestine is a matter of human rights. And this is something that is universal. It requires education, it requires understanding the history, but it's part of the educational process. Occupation, which is what is behind the conflict, is illegal, unjust, it violates international law, very basic. But it's, again, a process of education, and we must oppose hegemony and complicity of the United States. The U.S. being the global superpower, it is our responsibility to oppose this, and we are coming from the global South, and it's part of what we have to do. So I know it's going through very quickly, but I hope that it sheds a little bit of light on how we can politically motivate Indian Americans to come to the right side and not join forces with the Zionists. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharat, for sharing your insightful thoughts, especially like the breakdown of the Zionist within the Jewish population. So we do want to keep like some time for question and answers as well. We're running a little bit behind on schedule. So we'll take a few questions from the audience first. I do also have a question from my side, but we'll take the audience question first. So please raise your hand, those who have questions. All right, start with that.
Okay, so I think that the question I have is, I know one of the things that you mentioned was around intergenerational trauma, and how Indians maybe don't have the same experience as Jewish populations do because of the Holocaust. But I think I would argue and wonder if it's worth framing this way to Indian Americans, especially of upper caste, that we do face intergenerational trauma due to the colonization of the British during the British Raj. Would it be worth then framing when we're trying to bring them into the fold that this is exactly what happened to us a long time ago, right? Not even 100 years ago, right? Would that be a successful method in aligning the plight of the Palestinian to the plight of Indians at some point, or South Asians generally?
Yeah, so I alluded to that in the when I talked about settler colonialism, and so because Indian Americans have a historical memory of British colonialism, there's I think it's much easier for Indian Americans to understand why they should oppose colonialism. But first we have to convince them that Israel is a colonial project, and it's a settler project, which is about land grabbing and expulsion of indigenous populations. So I think that is the challenge. But I think it's logical, and it's entirely doable.
All right, any more questions?
Yeah, a quick one. I thought this intergenerational trauma could be a double-edged weapon, because in India, the right wingers thrive on the claim of being under foreign rule for 1,000 years, and the current Prime Minister, in fact, claims to have liberated Hindus from 1,000 years of slavery and so on and so forth. So this could be something that would feed into their politics too. So it's something that we need to be cautious about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'm not actually suggesting that. I'm just using the intergenerational trauma as an explanation for Israeli behavior, right? I'm not saying that it's an argument to be applied to Indian Americans. But if we are aware of these things, we have to, because it's very hard to, when you see these social media videos of Israelis, telling what they really think, it's really hard to believe that they're talking openly about killing 1 million Palestinians, and it doesn't faze them one bit. And how can this be? So it's more for our understanding of what's going on. Yeah. Thank you.
I agree with everything that you said about Zionism, etc. But given our own geographic location and the fact that many of us pay taxes to the U.S. government, we need to emphasize the role of the United States, not only in terms of supplying the weapons that go and bomb babies in Gaza now, but the long history in the Middle East, and we have to emphasize the United States criminality, right? And if we are silent, we are criminals.
No, you're absolutely right. So because there's a lot of mythology about this if you look at the mainstream media, there's all kinds of questions about whether Biden can how much leverage does he have on Netanyahu. That's not the point. I mean, first of all, he does have much more leverage on Netanyahu than he's exercising, and because he can just, with an executive order, he can stop the arms flows right away. But more than that, it's about the motivations of the United States. The United States is not merely a supporter of what Israel is doing. Okay, the U.S. is the big power. The U.S. has interests in the Middle East. Israel is the best projection of U.S. interest in the Middle East. It's a more reliable partner than any other country. I mean, the U.S. I mean, just take for example the pillars of U.S. foreign policy. If you go back 45 years ago, the pillars of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East were the Shah of Iran, Egypt, Turkey, and Israel. Okay, of those, Israel is the only one that the U.S. considers to be a reliable partner, even though Turkey is still a member of NATO. Iran is gone. Egypt is a dictatorship that only partially projects U.S. interests in the Middle East, and so it's really about the interests of the superpower, and Israel is just a tool in that. But Israel also has its own agenda, which is about expelling the Palestinians and creating an exclusive state in the whole of that land, including Judea and Samaria, which is the West Bank.
I have a question. So we talked about, which you shed a little bit light on, the disjunctions. What challenges do you foresee for all the marginalized groups in terms of in terms of the solidarity of all this marginalized group who are trying to stand up against all this supremacy? The biggest challenge.
Yeah. So first of all, before I say the challenges, I want to say that I think we've come a long way. In the sense that, for example, I mean, I'll just give you a few anecdotal examples. First of all, if you look at the large protests that have taken place in the Bay Area, and have been to many of them, one thing that we always say is that it is the incredible diversity of the faces in our Palestine protests throughout the Bay Area. And this is in such contrast to the tiny Zionist protests, which are and we also saw it in the city council meetings where you had the Zionists protesting against the ceasefire resolutions, and they were all white. There was no diversity at all. So that is an accomplishment. But we have to continue building that solidarity. It's not just building solidarity between communities, but also building solidarity among movements, among different movements. And again, there's progress. I mean, I went on a 3-day walk for a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants from San Jose to San Francisco just a few weeks ago, and there were Spanish-speaking when most of the group was Spanish speaking. So I mean, the language of the march was Spanish actually. But some of the chants that they were giving were, as we walked, were not just about a pathway to citizenship, but also about Viva Viva Palestina, and so there this awareness is growing, and we just have to keep on pushing it because there's still a lot of connections to be made among groups that are working on different causes, different aspects of social justice. We need to get more worker involvement in it. The labor unions, the members of labor unions need more education and exposure to these issues, and so it's a part of a process. But I see that the trajectory is moving in the right direction, and it's accelerating. It's go back to 2006 when we had the first May Day marches, and the crowd was all the Latino, the Latinx community, and now it's much more diverse. So things are moving, but as I said, there's work to be done.
We have like a couple more minutes for any more questions. Yep, right there. We have one more.
Thank you for drawing these connections between sort of the seemingly disjunct, but at the bottom line sort of having supremacist underpinnings. I want to push a little bit further on the claim of India or the Indian or the Hindu supremacist project not actually being a settler colonial project. Because as we know, in the case of Kashmir, it definitely is, and it is so in the rest of India as well, right? And so, and I think about this from the work of also Mahmood Mamdani, who's a Ugandan scholar, who's spoken of colonialism and nationalism as being two sides of the same coin, right? And whether it's actually worth pushing Indian Americans into thinking about us being separate from the Zionists in those particular ways, because I feel like they're also, I can totally see all of the disjunctions being appropriated by Hindu supremacists in the way to argue. Like a very good example that Mr. Manoj also brought up was the idea of the homeland, right? Like this is the idea of the secular nation versus the idea of this is the Hindu birthright, and then sort of following the lines of Pakistan's claim around Zionist Muslim state, right? And which has also been a very big struggle within Pakistan. So I just wanted to sort of have some more reflections, if you have any, around the idea of how Indian and Hindu nationalism in particular also might have some colonial leadings, and whether those are worth emphasizing. So it's not a question as much as it's just a request for reflection.
Mm. Yeah, I think that that I'm not sure that the overall thrust of what is happening in Kashmir is I'm a little bit hesitant to think of it as a colonial project. I think it's about India asserting its right through military might, through violence, to prevent what it perceives as a potential secession of Kashmir from the rest of India. So I remain open to the possibility that through discussion that there may be some kind of colonial elements in that, but it's more about police state repression and hyper-militarization to prevent something from happening. India is it's not like the United States yet, where it's out there projecting power everywhere in the world, including very close to the borders of other countries. So I don't see India yet as a colonial power in its own right. But there is the question of autonomy, right? I mean, the current government is backtracking on the autonomy that Kashmir once had, and the question is what are the implications of that in the long term, and can we make some kinds of arguments to that would sort of ring a bell among Indian Americans. And I think the strongest argument is just that we had a colonial history that we fought against, and we threw out the British, the colonial power, and so that is a rejection of colonialism, and it's a rejection also of settler colonialism.